episode of Stoke Meter. And for lack of a better word, we are stoked to have our next guest, Michelle Hoover, join the discussion today. Michelle is a leadership development consultant. I had the opportunity to meet Michelle when we were co-facilitators for Converse at one time back in the day. And she is also the founding member and principal of BEM Leadership. And we'll go into a little bit about that. But Michelle, welcome. Again, it's been a minute.
It's been a minute. Thank you. Happy 2024. What a way to get going.
Oh my goodness. I'm a little flipped out, quite frankly.
You
Right?
and me both, man. You and me
Oh
both.
my goodness. Well, it's so we go on leadership development. We met in leadership development. I figured, why don't we talk about some leadership development and what you've seen and especially in the business climate nowadays. It's a lot different from when I first started going to school and then went into work over at Wall Street and in the tech area and all of those things now. And leadership really is a critical topic nowadays. It really is something that can impact us in all kinds of ways. And wanted to get your point of view on what you see as effective leadership and whatever tangent that you'd like to take.
Oh, sure. Well, just thinking about how much has changed. When we used to talk about external forces not too long ago, in the last, 20 years or so, when I started, external forces meant Brazil, Russia, India, China. And now we think about external forces in terms of um, the environment, what's going on in Ukraine, what's happening in the West Bank and Gaza, and what happened in our own country with George Floyd and social justice. So, what I have been really heartened by as somebody who really, I'm 46 years old, and I feel like I grew up and am coming of age professionally, if you will, at a time when humanity in leadership is really being valued. That um, it's not just about increasing shareholder value. It's not just about making sure that, we're meeting our financial performance expectations. There really is, oh, and not to mention a global pandemic. I can't believe I just skipped over that. But I think the sequence of occurrences that humanity has gone through has really forced leaders to make that barrier between work and life more permeable, right? So it's
Right.
no longer work-life balance. Somebody out there who is much more famous than I and has a bajillion-dollar company calls it work-life harmony. And I buy into that, in that in order for employees to truly be their best, we have to look out for them in their totality as human beings. So that's what I'm paying attention to most these days, just the wholeness and the whole person experience of being a leader, and keeping your eyes on the totality of the individuals who work with you.
Before we go too far into that, what do you think drove that? What caused that change? Because it really has been significant over the last, I don't know, a couple decades or so, where you kind of went from that, kind of a authoritative model to something much more progressive that you're talking about now. What drove that?
I think the pandemic, which I very surprisingly overlooked in listing all those factors, was a huge part of it, in that the pause that it necessitated and just the break in the action that it offered gave folks an opportunity to really think about how they were spending their time, such that uh, decisions that required no thought beforehand, the 75-minute commute one way, the
Mhm.
taking a phone call at your son or daughter's practice, the taking a last minute flight to attend whatever meeting. Those decisions that we made that allowed for all those things to happen weren't happening. And the alternative did happen. We got to spend more time with our families. We spent less time
Mhm.
commuting. We just saw life in a different way. We weren't on autopilot.
Right.
And another thing that the pandemic presented was an actual, life or death scenario in which, in the early days of the virus spreading, and we had no tools to combat it. We didn't know what was happening. We didn't know whether we were coming or going. And as somebody who was living in New York City at the time of the pandemic, and as somebody who got sick in late March of 2020, and who was told not to go to the doctor because I could still breathe, it was the first time in my, actually the second time in my life. That's a seed for you, Maurice. The second time in my life where I really thought about, how I was living, and whether it was how I wanted it to be, and whether I was extracting the juice of every day. And I don't think I'm the only person who had that experience. And I think enough of us did to question those decisions that we easily said yes to in the past.
Mhm.
So I would say that's the start of it. And then, of course, you have people who are mobilized. I think Gen Z is really clear about letting us know what they think, and there are children or our relatives or our coworkers. And in a more inclusive society, when we're listening for all signals, wherever they're coming from, we're just paying attention to that more. So I think the change has come from a variety of sources.
I like it. And, I have to ask this question too, though. So before it was all Gen Y, Gen Y. And matter of fact, when we were doing that consulting back in the day, that I mean that's like 5 years ago. And
I know.
back, yeah, right. And Z was still kind of in the periphery. I'm wondering
Mhm.
what is it that you see is the difference between Gen Y and Z? Because it's been a long time since I've been in the actual workforce in a company. I've been on the external side, but there's got to be some very I remember when it was going from Gen X to Gen Y, and there was significant difference. But now you still have multiple generations in that workforce.
Well, as a solid Gen Xer born in 1977, as I say, I'm coming of age in the work in terms of my working years, and I'm now in the position where I'm like, wow, young folks these days. So I think there's some of that, in that the older generations are always paying attention to how folks who are newer to the workforce are just presenting us with ideas and challenging our assumptions and challenging the way that we think. So I think it's just this like habitual thing that happens whenever a new generation comes in. But Gen Z, they just got into the workforce within the last few years. They're 20% of the population. And growing up as digital natives, and having that, so Gen Y was the first generation to come in as a digital native. These folks are even more evolved.
Yeah.
A lot of these folks are controlling the wallet of their families. They have incredible purchasing power. They have more digital know-how. And if you just think about the criticality of that skill set and the fluency that that skill set allows them in this environment where everything's fast moving, combined with the advent of other digital platforms like TikTok. I mean, TikTok just blew up, and
Yeah.
it's how a majority of them get their news. So I think it's just the habits of the old folks, just contemplating this new set of folks and what they're about, as well as just how this group of folks sees the world and how they communicate in their world, and how they access the world through their digital fluency.
That's it cracks me up because I remember going back to school. This is back in Columbia in 98, a long time ago. And they were talking, and this was in the organizational psychology program, and they said that snippet learning, it's that's the way that you get to people and keep their attention and so on. And they go, well, how do we do snippet learning when we have all these boring little things that we click on? And as you've been speaking about that, it's quite astounding to me that TikTok and Instagram and those things have created snippet learning platforms, and they're so addicting. And there's so many dumb subjects I know of now because I've been exposed to the snippet learning on a digitized format. If I would have had that back in an organization or even creating programs for leaders, that would have been a game changer back in the day because there was no exemplification of it. It was a lot of philosophy and a lot of classroom type of stuff. But this is when you see different things happening in the world, utilizing that learning that you're trying to teach in that medium. Wow. And have you seen that impact leadership a whole lot?
Oh, absolutely. Well, and just in the field of leadership development, and I think we're speaking about the same thing. When we had time for contemplation, when we had more patience and dedication to contemplation and deliberation, um, things would become more protracted. So when I started in leadership development in 2005, the industry standard for a senior executive program was 5 days, maybe 3 times a year, with each session during the day being like 4 hours, right? And now I talk to companies, and they're like, well, what can you do in 90 minutes? And I'm like, well, let's talk about your objectives. I don't fight it anymore. It's more about acknowledging that individuals' attention spans are shorter than they've ever been, and the captive audience that we had on site in a hotel ballroom, in whatever cool destination. I mean, those days, well, I mean, it still happens, but it's not as frequent. And folks aren't depending on just that experience to deliver learning. They're getting it everywhere. So just the shorter attention spans, the need to pack in a lot of stuff in a very short amount of time. But what hasn't changed is the desire for connections.
Mhm.
So, when you're in that hotel ballroom and making new friends and learning together for 5 days, in the evaluation forms at the end, the feedback was always the same. The best part of this was meeting these folks and having
Yep.
a new network. And folks still want that connection. So, some things will always remain, but we just have to get creative around, how we navigate the length of time that we have to work with.
So I want to tie a couple of things together here. This is just something I've thought about recently that I want your perspective on. So we were talking about social media, and you look at like our generation, and it was really we had Facebook. That was our social media, and it was entirely relationship based. It really wasn't interest based at the time at all. It was people that I knew and people that knew the people that I knew, kind of thing. And then you go to like TikTok, and it's not around relationships, it's more around the focus around a topic or something very specific. And then, like you said, but workers still want that connection. And I wonder sometimes, does, you know, our generation was focused on more of the relationships, TikTok and the newer generations are focused more around like the topics and specific learning. Does that equate to more siloed work environments? And so, like, for example, if I'm a laboratory technician, do I really care about getting to meet the people down the hall in a different department? Or am I like that TikTok? I want the information that's relevant to me and the people that are relevant to me. I don't know. Do you see that as a trend, or am I?
I mean, I think you're onto something in that, like just what we're seeing now in terms of what we're seeing in Israel and the West Bank and Gaza, and what we saw when Black Lives Matters was happening, and when Asian people were getting clobbered because we were being accused of spreading and bringing coronavirus to this country. There was this like need on social media for you to pick a side and
Mm,
declare and
wow.
say who you are, right? And put a stake in the ground. And as somebody who felt that personally and understood where that was coming from, it doesn't allow for explanation and it doesn't open conversations for deeper understanding, right? And there's a reason why we promote collaboration in workplaces, and there's a
Hmm.
reason why um, we're all constantly navigating the gray area. So I do think that there is, um, I mean, I guess like my my amateur as an amateur observer of culture, I think there is a call to pick a side, pick a cause, fight for it unabashedly. And I understand where that comes from. Maybe I'm just old fashioned, or maybe I'm just too much of a facilitator at heart, because I believe that if 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 side A is coming out aggressively against side B and side
Hmm.
B is just returning that forehand as aggressively,
Yeah.
we're not going to get anywhere. We have to talk. We have to determine, what kinds of common ends and outcomes can we meet. So I haven't seen that in terms of uh, in the workplace yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if that kind of underlying feeling, if somebody's resisting to engage with a unit or colleagues that they otherwise would not have had a chance to meet. I wonder how much of that kind of sentiment is playing into that.
I wonder also if it's more, maybe I'm thinking the wrong direction. So maybe, we're kind of talking about vertical silos in a sense. Sometimes I wonder if it's more of a horizontal silo between, like between leadership and core employees. Like if I'm interested about work-life balance and leadership is focused on something different, maybe that's that disconnect that is being created. I don't know. It's fascinating to think about because it's definitely
Hmm.
changed. And like you said, I know hiring practices post-pandemic are incredibly different. you
Hmm.
know it used to be that you would try and hire someone for life, and now you hire them for, you hope you get 2 years. Like,
Exactly.
it's completely changed.
Yeah.
Exactly. And like folks who are hiring do so with the knowledge that they've got, 18 to 24 months, and the goal is to imprint on them in such a way that they will, whether or not they know it, that the departing employee becomes a brand ambassador for that company. So
Hmm.
it's less about, I mean, I think all companies hope for longevity, but
Mhm.
they are consciously setting themselves up for the great possibility that this employee is going to go. We're going to have to find a new one. But if they talk about us glowingly in the market, then that's a win.
Yeah. Yep. You made me think about everything that has been going on in the world in the last few bits, and how you said they stick a flag in the ground. And one of the things that I would always counsel leaders was that of being careful of playing position ping pong. Basically, I stand in this position. No, you're wrong. No, no, you're wrong, and this is why you're wrong. There was never any of that dialogue. And it's so funny that it gets back to the basics of that dialogue that really breaches those differences in a big way. Matter of fact, we interviewed, boy, this is like almost a couple years ago, right, Gary? We interviewed the then uh, diversity officer for, I believe it was Spotify,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
I asked them, how do you not weaponize? How do you ensure that something like diversity and inclusion is not weaponized? And it was one of those questions that I had to see, because it was going all up and down in the workforce environment. And it really did come down to dialogue. And with all these differences of opinion and such, and the so-called flag staking, what have you seen leaders been successful leaders do that overcomes those barriers? It could be, to me, it's simple, but it's not. With everything going on, it's not as simple as that I might assume.
Yeah, well, it kind of loops back to the beginning of this conversation. So what tends to work is just recognizing humanity
Yeah,
and complexity and honestly wanting, if you are sincere
yeah,
in seeing an individual's pain, if you are sincere
yeah.
in seeing the the difficulty and the morality in what's, or the lack of morality in the what's going on,
Hmm.
and acknowledge that, it wins. If you come to the table authentically and say, I don't know a lot about this and I want to learn, and I know it's not your job to teach me, but know that I have an open mind and an open heart,
Hmm.
and I'm not fixed on this. I'd love to talk to you. Like, sincerity, authenticity,
Yeah.
ownership, ownership of your learning agenda, and your owning your own learning and development agenda in these matters of humanity goes a long way. So I think that if you make it less of a you know a topic that is ping ponging around TikTok, and make it something that you are taking up for yourself
Yeah.
as a growing edge, that often takes a lot of the heat out of it, and
Hmm.
turns it into uh, a human wanting to learn about other humans.
It's great point. Yeah, great point. Gary, I'm just thinking, we used to hang out at Arizona State back in the day, and I would, and this goes back to even leadership and how not to take offense. And this is it came to mind. Walking down, and you go by the math building. Who do you think they're going to ask for advice first, me or Gary? Happened all the time. It happened all the time when we in college,
Oh yeah,
right?
oh yeah.
And instead of going, what? Just because I'm this, it was such a laugh fest because I'd look at Gary and go, he's a math genius. You don't want anything to do with me. And
Then I had
so,
you, faked out too because I wasn't a math genius, but
but it's funny how some of the problems we create, and especially as leaders, are we might take offense when it could be diffused with something as simple as something like that. But I do digress. But yeah, as you were speaking about that, it was pretty fun.
yeah. Well, I think sometimes too that I don't know. I think one of the challenges is leadership has changed so rapidly, and in recent history as well. Is what advice or counsel would you give leaderships that are having a hard time, or leaders that are having a hard time adjusting to that new environment? Because a knee-jerk reaction is to be like, you know, well, it's always been this way.
Yeah.
They just need to get on board with the program. You know, I see that a lot in coming from leaders from different organizations right now, where they're having a hard time pivoting to the new real.
Mhm.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I think it's applying what is out there and known to be effective leadership under this lens. So for like Brene Brown, thought like out of this world, commercial success, has her stuff on Netflix, widely respected as an expert, and her thing is vulnerability, right? Just take
Yes.
that and apply that here, and you you have a way of thinking about your own humanity in these
Yeah.
challenging times as a leader. And also you can apply that vulnerability lens to these employees that you have, who are no doubt struggling at some point or another during this time. So the answers are out there, but back to the silo idea, Gary, it's okay. Are we thinking about this time right now as being unique? Then yes, but it doesn't mean the tools that we need to navigate this time have to be unique, right? What works? What works? Now, how could it work in this set of circumstances?
Yeah. No, there's a lot of good information here. I mean, this is a topic that we can go on and on and on about because there's so many different dynamics in leadership, as we've all experienced, right? And I wanted to ask this, Gary. This is going to be unique. I want you to play consultant to Gary for a second.
Okay.
I'm
So,
game.
Gary, what are some of the things you might be seeing in your organization, from a leadership perspective, that you'd want a different take on? And you were reaching out over here to Michelle.
I think, yeah, you're kind of pulled out of me what I was probably already kind of thinking. Um, and I think it goes back to a little bit of that question that I was asking before is some, and let me, how do you say this? What do you do when you have um, leaders in an organization that, oh, how do you say it? Like, let's say you take someone and they're split down the middle. One half, they're incredibly competent in what they do. Their technical skills are off the chart. Whatever they're assigned to do is just amazing. And then on the flip side, you have someone that from a leadership perspective is just not really that good. They're kind of toxic, or they don't, you know what I mean? They don't bring people together. They're that micromanager. They're the, fill in all the blanks of negative leadership. Um, is it a deal where you throw the whole thing out and try and find someone that does better? Or, I mean, I'm being honest too. Or what are some strategies to help or coach that individual? And I'm not thinking of anyone specifically. I don't want anyone to
Yeah,
think,
yeah. Oh, I wonder who that
but,
is.
but I see it a lot.
Yeah. So no rookie treatment at the first appearance here. I'm just I
Yeah.
just got to answer this one. Um, I think what I would be curious about is understanding how much influence or where the influence resides in that leadership body, and determine where you have momentum given where there is lead, heavy leadership influence. It's leadership is completely about influence. So if we can think about where it currently sits and what those individuals are willing to do to bring up the rear, if you will, right? So it's making it a team sport. I think it's about understanding where the motivation is as well, right? So is it a technical gap? Is it a motivation gap? And if it's a motivation gap, is it because we're not talking about the goals in a way that are relatable and identifiable to the folks who are perhaps not showing as much energy enthusiasm for the common goal that we're trying to achieve? So go ahead, you look like you're going to say something.
Oh, no, I love that term. Where's the influence? That's pretty profound. I mean,
That's Michelle, though. She's profound.
yeah,
I'm profoundly a lot of things, but um, well, I think because as leaders, I think, you know, especially in service environments, and having just met you, Gary, I can imagine, a hospital system, and I'm not saying this is a true to life
sure.
scenario, but like just thinking about a hospital system and knowing that you're literally in the business of saving lives.
Mhm.
And uh gosh, eh, people have to summon superhuman strength, seeing what you see and tackling the problems that come before you. And I can imagine when that is how you make your living, you feel alone a lot of the
Mm.
times. And you feel like it is up to you to come up with the thing, the cure, the antidote to the pain, whatever it is. But what I also know about hospital situations is that, in trauma environments, there's amazing teamwork. In teaching hospitals, when you're rounding, the Socratic method can be very effective. So
Mhm.
I think it's blending the desire to produce the answer yourself in a superhuman individual way with the fact that you are surrounded by people who also have that instinct, but having the self-awareness and self-management to stop yourself from saying, I have the answer, and saying, let's figure out the answer together. Okay, now as a body, how can we do this together? And let's start with who can influence the dead weight back here, or how can we figure out, how we can make this situation compelling for them to get engaged in.
Mhm.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head in a lot of ways around some of the elements of healthcare. And what I think is interesting too, and this is a little bit of a shifting gears, is you talk about dealing in areas of trauma. What I think is fascinating about healthcare is when we as healthcare providers react to traumatic situations like normal people would, that's when we have a problem.
Mm.
You know,
Mhm.
because if we see something like someone comes in that's mangled, most people would run.
Mhm.
We don't, but when we run, now we're broken. It's kind of an interesting uh,
Mhm.
backwards element to healthcare. But anyway, that's a total
Mhm.
side point. Something I've been fascinated with as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, this is good stuff. Well, Michelle, this is exactly what I was hoping to get down to. And sorry to throw on that instantaneous case study.
I love a challenge. I love a
It
challenge.
is great stuff. But
Well,
for
let
those,
me ask a quick question then, while we're on it, is if you and this may be an impossible question to answer, but if you were going to give advice to a leadership team about what to look for in a new hire, what are the must-haves and the must-nots that you would suggest or provide? Just out of curiosity.
In these days, values alignment is number one. Do you have the same goals that we do?
Mhm.
And do you execute on the goals in the way that we expect you to? Right. So oftentimes, like, you can agree, always alignment on what you're striving for. The rub comes in how the work is actually done. So getting more granular on, how does this person think? How does this person execute? How does this person lead? How have they obtained followership in the past? How do they build multipliers? How conscious are they of the diminisher behavior that they may have, right? So I think my after 20-ish years of leadership development and getting exposed to other work within the employee life cycle, I think we pay a lot to the big picture of a
Mhm.
candidate when we're hiring them. We pay less attention to the how of how this person moves about the workplace and gets stuff done. So I am more interested these days in the how.
Yep,
Oh, that's awesome.
that
I like
is,
it.
it is indeed. Well, I would hope that if anyone has any leadership questions, you reach out to Michelle over at BIM Leadership there. She has, it was a joy to work side by side with her and just to to hear all of the different things that are coming about in this day from the point of leadership development. I have to thank you for shedding light on what I was taught is traditional and even new in vogue. And now that's not so new in vogue anymore. So thank you for bringing that great update on what uh, the leadership paradigm looks like. Paradigm. I don't even know if that's the right word, but you get my drift. Awesome. Uh, Anything else there, Gare?
How do people get a hold of you? Where do they find you, Michelle?
Oh, thank you. www.bemleadership.com, BAEM leadership.com.
BAM. Okay. Awesome. Yeah, we'll make sure we get that in the notes and people can reach out and see if they can utilize your services. You've got a lot of great information and knowledge.
Yes.
Help a lot of people.
Thank you. Thank you. Love sharing it. Love what I do.